The gun came up before Olivia Hayes even registered what she was looking at, and her body moved faster than her mind could catch up. She'd been crossing a narrow side street off Royal Street, balancing a to-go box of beignets and half listening to a street trumpet player 2 blocks down, when she saw the dark sedan idling at the curb, its passenger window sliding down in a way that made every hair on her arms stand up before she understood why. A man stepped out of a restaurant 20 feet ahead of her, dark suit, unhurried, utterly unaware, and the gun inside that window rose to meet him. Olivia didn't think. She dropped the beignet and shoved. The bullet meant for his chest tore into her shoulder instead, spinning her hard against the brick wall of the restaurant, pain exploding white and total through her whole body. The sedan peeled away before she hit the ground. Somewhere above her, a voice was shouting her name, except he didn't know her name yet, couldn't have, and what he actually shouted was, "Someone call an ambulance, now." The stranger she'd just saved knelt over her, pressing his own jacket hard against her shoulder, and even through the haze of shock and blood loss, Olivia registered 2 things clearly. His hands were steady in a way that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd stopped someone from bleeding out on a sidewalk, and his eyes, dark and furious and terrified all at once, never once left her face. "Stay with me," he said. "You don't get to close your eyes yet." "Who?" she managed, the word dissolving into a gasp of pain. "Later," he said. "Right now you just breathe." He didn't wait for the ambulance. Sirens were still 4 minutes out by his own men's estimate, and 4 minutes, he decided in the space of a single heartbeat, was 4 minutes too long. He lifted her off the pavement himself, not gently because there was no gentle way to do it, but carefully, cradling her against his chest, and started walking fast toward a hospital 3 blocks away that he trusted more than any ambulance crew that might ask questions he couldn't yet answer. People on Bourbon Street parted around him like he was something dangerous, which Olivia would later understand he was. A man in a torn, blood-soaked shirt carrying a stranger through the French Quarter should have drawn 100 phones, a dozen calls to police. Instead, the crowd simply moved aside and looked away, the particular kind of averted attention that told her, even through shock, that whoever this man was, this city already knew better than to watch him too closely. "Name," he said, low and urgent as they reached the hospital's sliding doors. "Tell me your name." "Olivia," she breathed. "Olivia," he repeated like he was making sure it would stay with him. "You're going to be fine, Olivia. I'm not leaving until I know that's true." He didn't leave. He walked her straight through the ER doors himself, refused to let go of her hand even as nurses moved in around them, and only released it when 2 doctors physically pulled him back to let them work. The last thing Olivia saw before the pain finally pulled her under was his face. A stranger's face, memorized now in a way she'd never forget, and the last thing she heard was him telling a nurse, in a voice that left no room for argument, that he would be paying for every part of her care personally, and that under no circumstances was she to be left alone. She had no idea yet whose protection she'd just bought with her own blood. Olivia Hayes was 27 years old, and the life she'd built in New Orleans had almost nothing in common with the danger that had just found her on a random Tuesday afternoon. She worked as a veterinary technician at a modest animal clinic in the Bywater neighborhood, a job she'd chosen not for the pay, which was thin, barely enough to cover her studio apartment above a shuttered po' shop, but because she'd spent her childhood on her grandfather's failing rescue farm outside Baton Rouge, learning early that some creatures only trusted you once you'd proven, patiently and repeatedly, that you wouldn't hurt them. Her grandfather had died 3 years ago, the farm sold off to cover his medical debts, and Olivia had moved to the city carrying almost nothing except the conviction that gentleness, applied consistently, was its own kind of strength. Her main financial pressure was unglamorous and constant. Student loans from an unfinished veterinary degree, abandoned 2 years in when her grandfather's illness made continuing impossible, debt she was still paying down on a technician's salary that barely stretched to cover rent and the loans both. Her personal goal, quietly held, was to finish that degree eventually, to become the veterinarian her grandfather had always believed she could be, though lately that goal had started to feel like something she talked herself out of more than something she was actively pursuing. Her emotional wound ran deeper than money. She'd learned over and over that people who needed saving rarely got saved by anyone who stuck around afterward. Her mother had left when Olivia was 9, her father working himself into an early grave rather than ask anyone for help, her grandfather dying alone in a hospital room because he'd refused, out of pride, to call Olivia until it was nearly too late. She'd built her adult life around one unbending rule. When someone needed help, you gave it immediately and without calculation, because hesitation was how people ended up alone when it mattered most. The recurring object she carried everywhere was a small compact mirror, cracked along one edge, that had belonged to her grandmother. Not valuable, not beautiful, but a piece of the only stable home she'd ever known, kept in her bag out of habit more than sentiment. The Tuesday before the shooting, Olivia had stayed 2 hours past her shift at the clinic, unpaid, holding down a terrified stray cat through an emergency procedure their overworked vet couldn't manage alone, because the alternative was letting the animal suffer while they waited for backup that might not come in time. She'd missed dinner, missed a call from a landlord about a rent increase she couldn't afford, and walked home exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with the particular fatigue of constantly giving more than she had. That was the same fatigue, the same reflexive instinct toward instant, uncalculated help, that sent her shoving a stranger out of the path of a bullet the very next afternoon without a single second of hesitation. She hadn't known his name when she did it. She hadn't known anything about him except that he was about to die and she was standing close enough to stop it. It was, in its own way, the most honest expression of who Olivia Hayes actually was. A woman who'd spent her entire life proving to a string of people who never stayed to notice that she showed up when it counted. Waking up in a hospital bed hours later, shoulder bandaged and aching, she found a folded note on the bedside table in unfamiliar handwriting. "Rent is covered. Don't argue. I'll explain when you're stronger." Oh. Olivia read it 3 times, anger cutting cleanly through the fog of painkillers. She hadn't asked to be paid for anything. She hadn't done what she did for money, and having a stranger assume otherwise, assume her instinct could simply be bought and settled like a debt, made something in her chest go tight and furious. She looked up to find an armed man standing quietly outside her hospital room door, positioned like a sentry, and understood with sudden cold clarity that whoever she'd saved wasn't an ordinary man at all. Whatever she'd just been pulled into, it wasn't over. It had barely started. Leonardo Conti visited the next morning and Olivia was ready for him. "Take it back," she said before he'd even fully entered the room, gesturing weakly at the note still sitting on her bedside table. "The rent. I don't want it." "You took a bullet meant for me," Leonardo said, closing the door behind him with a quiet care that struck her as strange for a man who otherwise moved like he owned every room he entered. "Covering your rent isn't generosity, Olivia. It's the least I can do." "It's not the least you can do. The least you can do is tell me who you are and why someone tried to kill you in the middle of the French Quarter on a Tuesday afternoon." He was quiet a moment, studying her the way she imagined he studied everything, carefully, thoroughly, cataloging details most people missed. "You're angry," he said, "and you have every right to be. But I think you're angrier about the money than the danger, which tells me something about you I didn't expect." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means most people who found out I was involved in what you're clearly starting to suspect I'm involved in would be terrified. You're insulted that I tried to pay you instead of explain myself." Something that might have been the beginning of respect moved across his face. "That's rare." "I'm a vet tech, not a fool," Olivia said. "I've seen how people acted on that street. Nobody looks away from a bleeding man being carried 3 blocks unless they already know exactly who's carrying him and exactly why it's safer not to ask questions." Leonardo's jaw tightened slightly, the first crack in his composure she'd seen. "My name is Leonardo Conti," he said. "My family runs a shipping and logistics company here in New Orleans. We also have other interests, older interests that I won't pretend don't exist, because you've clearly already guessed enough of the truth that lying to you now would just insult us both." "Mafia," Olivia said flatly. "That's the word people use," Leonardo said. "It's not wrong." She absorbed that, her heartbeat picking up fear and something else. A strange, unwilling curiosity tangled together. "And someone tried to kill you because of that." "Someone tried to kill me because of a rival family's business I won't bore you with," Leonardo said. "What matters is you're the reason I'm standing here instead of in a morgue, and I intend to make sure whoever did this doesn't get a second chance at either of us." "Both of us?" Olivia's stomach dropped. "Why would they come after me?" "Because you were 3 feet away when their shooter's face was reflected in something," Leonardo said, and Olivia's hand went instinctively, involuntarily, to her bag on the chair beside the bed, the cracked compact mirror recovered from the scene along with her other belongings, sitting inside like evidence she hadn't known she was carrying. "The mirror," she said slowly. "It fell out of my bag when I was shot. It must have cracked in the fall." Leonardo's attention sharpened instantly, dangerously. "Do you still have it?" She pulled it from her bag, hands unsteady, and held it out. The crack ran diagonally across the glass, distorting the reflection into fractured, disorienting angles. But caught in one shard, faint and warped, was unmistakably the ghost of a face. A man's face, leaning forward from the driver's seat of a car, close enough to have been watching his own shooter take aim. "That's him," Leonardo said, quiet and lethal. "Or someone who was in that car with him." "I don't know who that is," Olivia said. "I don't know anything about any of this." "I know," Leonardo said, and something in his voice shifted, softened slightly, an unfamiliar gentleness working its way into a tone she suspected he rarely used. "But you're the only person alive who's seen his face, even distorted like that. That makes you valuable to me and dangerous to whoever sent that shooter. I can't undo that. I can only make sure it doesn't cost you anything more than it already has." "What does that mean practically?" "It means I'm not leaving you unprotected," Leonardo said. "Whether you want that or not." "I don't remember agreeing to any of this." "You didn't," Leonardo admitted. "You agreed to it the moment you shoved me out of the way of that bullet. Everything after that has just been me trying to make sure your instinct didn't get you killed for nothing." Olivia looked at the mirror in her hand, the fractured reflection of a stranger's face staring back at her, and felt the full weight of what she'd stepped into settle heavily into her chest. "I want to go home when I'm discharged," she said. "My actual home. Not wherever you're planning to put me." Leonardo's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A decision forming, one she wouldn't fully understand the consequences of for several more days. "We'll see," he said, which wasn't agreement, and they both knew it. Olivia was discharged 3 days later, shoulder in a sling, and true to her word she went straight back to her studio apartment above the shuttered po' shop, only to find within an hour that the apartment across the hall had been quietly rented by 2 of Leonardo's men, and a car she recognized from the hospital parked discreetly at the end of her block. She marched down 4 flights of stairs, furious, to confront him directly, only to find Leonardo himself waiting by the car, like he'd anticipated exactly this reaction. "You said we'd see," Olivia said. "This isn't we'll see. This is you deciding for me anyway. You wanted to come home." "You're home," Leonardo said evenly. "I'm just making sure home doesn't become the place you get hurt again." "By putting armed men in my hallway without asking me first? Would you have said yes if I'd asked?" "No," Olivia admitted, some of her fury deflating slightly at his directness. "But that's not the point. The point is you didn't ask." Leonardo was quiet a moment, absorbing that with more genuine consideration than she expected. "You're right," he said finally. "I'll do better." It wasn't the argument she'd braced for, and it threw her slightly off balance. This dangerous, controlled man conceding a point instead of overriding her objection with more authority. The external consequence arrived 2 days later, delivered by Leonardo's cousin Marco, who ran logistics for the legitimate side of the family business and had noticed, with visible alarm, the sudden diversion of security resources toward a veterinary technician nobody in the family had previously heard of. "People are talking, Leo," Marco said, cornering him in his office. "Word's already spread that the shooter's target survived because some woman took the bullet for you, and that you've had her under guard ever since. If Rossetti's people find out she can identify his shooter, even partially, they're not going to wait around wondering how much she remembers." "I'm aware of the risk, Marco. Are you aware how it looks? The boss, personally overseeing protection for a stranger, missing 2 council meetings this week alone? People are starting to wonder if you're distracted. Distraction gets men killed in this business." Leonardo's jaw tightened. "Then I'll make sure I'm not distracted where it matters. But I'm not leaving her exposed because it's politically inconvenient." The warning proved prophetic within days. Olivia's apartment building superintendent mentioned in passing that a man had come by asking questions about the tenant in 4B, her unit, claiming to be an old friend, though he hadn't given a name and had left before the superintendent could get more than a vague description. Leonardo's men confirmed through their own channels that the same description matched surveillance photographed near the clinic where Olivia worked twice in 1 week. "They know where you work," Leonardo told her, finding her at the clinic after hours, his expression carefully controlled but his eyes sharp with real alarm. They know where you live. Going back to your apartment isn't safe anymore, Olivia. I'm not saying that to control you. I'm saying it because it's true and I think you already suspect it is. Olivia set down the supplies she'd been organizing, hands unsteady. You're telling me I can't go home. I'm telling you that if you go home tonight I can't guarantee what happens next, Leonardo said. I want to move you somewhere I can actually protect properly. My family's townhouse. It's secure in ways your apartment simply isn't. And if I say no? Then I'll find another way, Leonardo said, but I'm asking you to consider it, because the alternative terrifies me more than I'm comfortable admitting. Olivia studied him, weighing real fear against her instinctive resistance to being managed, protected, decided for. If I go, she said finally, it's on my terms. I keep working at the clinic. I'm not a prisoner in your townhouse. The moment this starts feeling like a cage instead of protection, I walk and you let me. Agreed, Leonardo said without hesitation, something in his posture loosening slightly at how readily he meant it. She gathered a single bag of essentials from her apartment under armed escort that night, the compact mirror tucked carefully among her things, and didn't look back at the building she'd called home for 3 years as the car pulled away. This isn't permanent, she said quietly, more to herself than to him as the French Quarter's lights blurred past the window. No, Leonardo agreed. It's just necessary for now. Neither of them said aloud what they both understood, that whatever fragile safety they'd built over 5 careful days had just tipped, irreversibly, into something far more binding than either had planned for. The Conti family townhouse sat on a quiet, gated street in the Garden District, elegant and heavily secured in ways that weren't obvious from the street. Olivia was given her own wing, her own lock on her own door, and a promise, repeated twice, that no one would enter without her permission. Scene 1 came the next morning, practical and unglamorous. Olivia found the household in quiet chaos over Leonardo's elderly aunt, Rosa, whose arthritic old dog, Biscuit, had refused to eat for 2 days and was struggling visibly to stand. He needs a vet, Olivia said, kneeling immediately beside the dog without being asked, her professional instincts overriding every ounce of her own exhaustion and fear. Has anyone actually looked at his joints? The family vet's out of town, Rosa said, wringing her hands. I don't know what to do for him. Olivia examined the dog carefully, gently, her hands finding exactly the right pressure points, exactly the right angles, years of training surfacing instinctively despite everything else happening around her. It's his hips, she said. Arthritis advanced. I can't fix it, but I can show you how to manage his pain until your vet's back. Heat therapy, a modified diet, gentle range of motion exercises. She spent an hour with Rosa and the dog, patient and thorough, and by the time she finished, Biscuit was eating again and Rosa was watching Olivia with an expression of quiet, grateful astonishment. You have a gift, Rosa said. A real one. Leonardo didn't tell me that. Leonardo doesn't know most things about me yet, Olivia said, surprising herself with how easily the words came. Scene 2 arrived 4 days later, an argument sharper than either of them expected. Leonardo announced over dinner that he wanted to add a second guard specifically assigned to walk Olivia to and from the clinic each day. Absolutely not, Olivia said immediately. I agreed to live here. I did not agree to be shadowed at work like a criminal. Olivia, if Rossetti's people are watching the clinic, then we handle that specifically, but you don't get to keep adding restrictions every time you get nervous, she said, voice rising with genuine frustration. I've spent my whole life being told other people know better than me what I need to stay safe. I am not doing that again, not even scared, not even here. Leonardo sat back, absorbing the force of it, and for the first time since she'd known him, actually stopped to consider instead of simply defending his position. You're right, he said finally. I keep defaulting to control because it's what I know how to do. Tell me what would actually work instead. Olivia's anger softened at the honesty of the concession. One guard at a distance, not hovering. Tell me exactly what you're worried about instead of just adding more restrictions. Let me decide how to respond to the actual threat, not just the fear of one. Done, Leonardo said and meant it. Scene 3 came on the 7th night, when Olivia found him alone on the townhouse's back gallery, a glass of scotch he wasn't drinking held loosely in one hand. I had a bodyguard once, Leonardo said before she'd even asked what was wrong. Marcus. He'd been with my father before me, practically family. 6 years ago there was an ambush meant for me and he stepped in front of it without hesitation the way you did on that street. He didn't survive it. I've spent 6 years since then making sure nobody else ever has to make that choice for me again. And then you did exactly that without even knowing my name. That's not the same thing, Olivia said gently, sitting beside him. Isn't it? You could have died for a stranger because I wasn't careful enough, the same way Marcus did. I made that choice myself, Leonardo, Olivia said. You didn't ask me to. You didn't manipulate me into it. I saw someone about to die and I moved. That's not your guilt to carry. That's just who I am. He looked at her, something raw and unguarded moving across his face. I don't know how to let people be close to me without eventually getting them hurt. I've been punishing myself for Marcus for 6 years, and I still haven't figured out how to actually change anything because of it. Then maybe this is your chance too, Olivia said quietly. Not by protecting people until they can't breathe. By actually letting them in and trusting them to make their own choices about the risk. They sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the garden district's evening quiet settling around them, and something passed between them that wasn't yet spoken but was undeniably real. Two people who'd both learned at real cost exactly how much courage it took to stay soft in a world that kept punishing softness. It was Marco who broke the moment, appearing at the gallery door, phone in hand, face tight. Leo, he said. The Delacroix Foundation Gala tomorrow night. Half the city's families will be there, including people who might have real information about who hired the shooter. I think we should go, use the crowd as cover to ask questions safely. But that means Olivia would need to come too for appearances and I don't love the exposure. Olivia looked at Leonardo. I'm coming, she said before he could object. It's dangerous. Staying hidden hasn't kept me safe so far, Olivia said. Maybe being visible, surrounded by witnesses, is exactly what keeps this from happening again. Leonardo studied her for a long moment, weighing every protective instinct against the promise he'd just made her. If you come, he said finally, you stay beside me the entire night. No exceptions. Agreed. The Delacroix Foundation Gala filled a restored ballroom near the Garden District with chandelier light and old New Orleans money. A crowd of legitimate donors mixed seamlessly with people whose fortunes came from considerably less legitimate sources. Olivia stood near Leonardo in a borrowed gown, heart hammering beneath her composed exterior, scanning faces the way she'd learned over the past week to scan for danger. She heard the voice before she placed the face, low, unhurried, faintly amused, coming from a cluster of men near the bar. Something about the rhythm of it snagged in her memory instantly, viscerally, and she went rigid. That voice, she whispered to Leonardo. I heard it. That night before the shot, someone said something to the driver right before the window came down. I didn't think I'd remember it, but I do. Leonardo followed her gaze to a silver-haired man in an impeccable tuxedo, laughing easily among men Leonardo recognized as legitimate businessmen with no obvious ties to organized crime. Damien Rossetti, Leonardo said, low and lethal. He's not supposed to be anywhere near this event. That's him. I'm certain. Damien, as if sensing the weight of attention on him, turned, and for one suspended second, his eyes met Olivia's across the room, and something in his expression shifted from social ease to cold, immediate calculation. He knew. He understood instantly that she'd recognized him. He's made us, Leonardo said, already moving, positioning his body between Olivia and Damien's sightline. We need to get you out of here now. But Damien moved faster than either of them expected, slipping through the crowd with practiced ease, disappearing through a service door before Leonardo's men could close the distance. Moments later, a text arrived on Leonardo's phone from an unknown number. She saw my face. Bring her to the East Service corridor alone, or I finish what should have been finished on that street. He has someone watching, Leonardo said, his composure cracking into something colder, more dangerous. He wants you specifically. Then I go, Olivia said. Absolutely not. Leonardo, if I don't, he sends someone else, somewhere else, and next time neither of us sees it coming. Her voice was steady despite the fear underneath it. I'd rather face this now with your men close by, than spend the rest of my life waiting for it to happen again. Leonardo's jaw worked, torn between every protective instinct he had and the promise he'd made her days earlier, that her choices remained hers. "If you do this," he said finally, "you're not alone for a single second. I'll be close enough to hear everything." Olivia walked toward the service corridor with her heart slamming against her ribs, the compact mirror, which she'd carried in her small clutch bag out of habit more than plan, suddenly feeling less like an heirloom and more like the only weapon she had. Damien was waiting in the dim corridor, calm and unhurried in a way that made her skin crawl. "You've caused me quite a lot of trouble," he said. "A veterinary technician of all people. I almost admire the inconvenience. You killed a man's bodyguard 6 years ago and tried to kill Leonardo Conti 2 weeks ago," Olivia said, keeping her voice level through sheer force of will. The same trained calm she used on frightened animals now turned toward a genuinely dangerous man. "I don't find that admirable." "No," Damien agreed. "I don't suppose you would." He stepped closer and Olivia forced herself to hold her ground, forced herself to keep talking, buying time, the way she'd learned years ago that panic only ever made things worse. "You know Leonardo's men are close," she said. "You know this doesn't end the way you're hoping it does." "It ends exactly the way it needs to," Damien said. "You're the only person who can put my face at that shooting. Once that's no longer true, I disappear back into the life I had before this entire mess started." "The mirror caught your reflection," Olivia said, watching his expression carefully, the same steady patience she used reading a frightened animal's body language. "Not just mine. Security's already seen the angle it was shot from. They know exactly where in that car you were sitting, which means they know exactly where to look for corroborating evidence, mirror or no mirror. Killing me doesn't erase what's already been found." It was a bluff. She didn't actually know if that was true, but Damien's hesitation, however brief, told her it had landed. "You're lying," he said, though his voice carried less certainty than a moment before. "Maybe," Olivia said. "But are you willing to bet your freedom on it?" That half-second of hesitation was exactly what Leonardo needed. He came through the corridor's far door fast and silent, flanked by 2 of his men, weapon already trained on Damien before the older man could fully register the threat. "It's over, Damien," Leonardo said, voice absolutely lethal. "Whatever you were sent to finish, you're finishing it in front of the family that sent you, not on my streets." Damien's composure finally cracked, real fear surfacing beneath the calculation. "Leonardo, we can discuss terms." "You had terms," Leonardo said. "You broke them the moment you put a gun in a crowded street. Now you get to explain yourself to the people who sent you and hope they're more forgiving than I am." Olivia, shaking now that the immediate danger had passed, felt Leonardo's hand find hers, steady and certain, and understood that whatever came next was going to change everything permanently. The reckoning came 2 days later, in a private meeting Leonardo arranged between his own organization and the family Damien had been secretly working for. A meeting Olivia wasn't present for, though its consequences reshaped everything around her almost immediately. "You're handing him back to them," Marco said, disbelieving when Leonardo explained his decision. "After what he did. Leo, we could deal with this ourselves. Quietly. It would send a much stronger message. It would also mean I'm no better than the men who taught me that quiet violence solves everything," Leonardo said. "Damien operated under a truce I personally negotiated 3 years ago. A fragile peace that let his family and mine coexist without open war. That truce is the only reason he had the freedom to plan an assassination attempt in the first place. If I break my word and handle this myself, I'm not just punishing Damien. I'm proving the truce was worthless from the start, and that invites every family watching to test me the same way. So instead you dissolve it entirely." "I dissolve it entirely," Leonardo confirmed, "and I hand Damien to the family that sent him with proof of what he actually did, including the fact that he acted against their own interests by nearly starting a war they never authorized. Let them decide his fate. Costs me the stability that truce provided. It weakens my position with families who valued that peace. But it's the only choice that doesn't make me complicit in exactly the kind of violence Damien represents." It was, Olivia would understand later, the single most costly decision Leonardo had made in years. Not the danger of confronting Damien, but the deliberate dismantling of a truce that had protected his organization's interests for 3 years. Word spread fast through the city's underworld that Leonardo Conti had chosen principle over advantage, and while some respected it, others saw only weakness, an opening to be tested. Leonardo didn't waver. He met with the rival family personally, presented the evidence, The mirror's distorted but corroborated image, testimony from his own security team, financial records tracing Damien's unauthorized contract, and watched a decade of careful diplomatic balance crack under the weight of doing the right thing instead of the convenient one. This will cost you, the rival family's head warned him not unkindly. Territories you've held for years will be tested now. People will wonder if you've gone soft. Then they'll learn quickly that I haven't, Leonardo said. I've simply decided which kind of strength I want to be known for. Damien was taken into the rival family's custody that same night, his fate settled by people other than Leonardo, the immediate threat to Olivia's life finally, permanently neutralized. But the cost lingered in every strained conversation Leonardo had over the following days, in the visible tension among his own captains, in the careful, watchful way former allies now regarded him. Olivia found him alone in his study 3 nights later, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before, the weight of everything he'd sacrificed finally visible. You gave up real power to protect me, she said. I understand what that cost you now. Marco explained it even though I don't think he meant to. I'd do it again, Leonardo said simply. Without hesitation. Why? Olivia asked, needing to understand, needing the honesty she'd learned to expect from him even when it was difficult. You could have handled Damien quietly. Kept the truce intact. Protected your position instead of dismantling it. I could have, Leonardo admitted. For years I told myself that kind of quiet, ruthless efficiency was strength. The same efficiency that got Marcus killed instead of me, that taught me protecting people meant controlling every variable until nothing could touch them. Watching you walk into that corridor, watching you talk Damien down using nothing but your own steady nerve and quick thinking, I understood something I'd been avoiding for 6 years. He met her eyes directly. Real strength isn't control. It's trusting someone enough to let them make their own choice, even when it terrifies you, and then having the courage to act with integrity regardless of what it costs you. You taught me that, Olivia. Not by trying to. Just by being exactly who you are. Olivia was quiet a long moment, weighing everything he'd just admitted against the fierce independence she'd fought so hard to protect throughout this entire ordeal. I need you to understand something too, she said finally. I'm not going to stay here, in this house in this city near you because I feel like I owe you for any of this. I've spent my whole life being someone other people decided to save, and it never once gave me anything real in return. That's exactly what I want to understand, Leonardo said. Whatever you choose next, it has to be entirely yours. Then I need to know something first, Olivia said. If I choose to walk away completely, go back to my old apartment, my old life, no protection, no obligation to you, would you actually let me? Leonardo was quiet a long moment, and when he answered, his voice carried none of the possessiveness she'd half expected, only a difficult, hard-won honesty. Yes, he said. It would break something in me to watch you go. But yes. I'd let you because anything else isn't actually protection. It's just control wearing protection's clothes, and I refuse to be that for you. Something in Olivia's chest finally, fully loosened. Then I'm choosing to stay, she said. Not because you saved me at the hospital and not because you dissolved a truce to protect me. Because somewhere in the last 2 weeks I found something here worth building. The clinic, your aunt's ridiculous, wonderful dog, and yes, you, and I want to choose that deliberately with my eyes open, understanding exactly what it costs and what it means. Leonardo reached for her hand, careful, deliberate, entirely his to offer and entirely hers to accept or refuse. Then let's build it, he said, on whatever terms actually work for both of us. She laced her fingers through his, the cracked mirror sitting forgotten in her bag nearby, its purpose finally fully served. No longer evidence of danger, but a strange, quiet reminder of exactly how they'd found each other. 6 weeks later, Olivia's shoulder had healed enough that she'd returned fully to work at the Bywater Clinic, though she now split her hours between there and an unexpected new arrangement. 3 afternoons a week volunteering at a small animal rescue Rosa had quietly funded, using Olivia's expertise to help other elderly New Orleanians manage aging pets they couldn't otherwise afford proper care for. You gave her the idea, you know, Leonardo told her one evening, watching her review intake notes at his kitchen table like it had become, somehow, entirely ordinary. Rosa hasn't stopped talking about it since Biscuit started walking properly again. I gave her the idea by accident, Olivia said. I was just trying to help a sick dog. That's usually how the things that matter most happen, Leonardo said. By accident, because someone couldn't help themselves from helping. The consequences of Damien's exposure had settled, slowly, into a new equilibrium. Leonardo's standing among the city's families remained genuinely weakened. 2 territorial disputes had already tested his authority in ways that wouldn't have happened under the old truce. But the respect he'd earned from those willing to see integrity as strength rather than weakness had begun, gradually, to offset the losses. He met each challenge directly, honestly, refusing to fall back into the ruthless efficiency he'd relied on before, and Olivia watched him build something steadier, if smaller, than what he'd inherited. She'd moved back to her own apartment eventually, genuinely her own choice, made without pressure, with Leonardo's full support rather than his resistance. Though she spent most nights at the Garden District townhouse anyway, not out of obligation but because it had, gradually and without either of them quite marking the moment, become somewhere that felt like home. One evening, sitting together on the same back gallery where he'd first told her about Marcus, Leonardo pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Not a ring, Olivia realized as he opened it, but a delicate silver locket shaped like a small, cracked mirror, a deliberate, careful echo of the object that had first connected them. "It's not asking for anything," he said before she could speak. "I know where we are. I'm not trying to rush past that. I just wanted you to have something that reminds you what your instinct built, that day on the street. Not just danger but this. Whatever this is becoming." Olivia took the locket, turning it over in her hands, throat tight with an emotion she didn't try to name. "I still have the original," she said. "Cracked mirror and all. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to throw it away." "Then don't," Leonardo said simply. "Keep both. Proof of who you were before and who you're choosing to become now." She closed the distance between them herself, deliberate, unhurried. The choice entirely her own, the way every real choice between them had been since that first honest conversation in her hospital room. "I'm not staying because you protected me," she said, echoing words she'd said once before, meaning them even more fully now. "I'm staying because you learned the hard way what real protection actually looks like. And because you never once tried to make that lesson about earning my gratitude instead of just doing the right thing." He kissed her then, gentle and certain, sealing a choice both of them had made freely, built not on debt or danger but on 2 people who'd each, in their own difficult way, learned the real difference between control and courage. Olivia still carries that cracked mirror in her bag, alongside the small silver locket Leonardo gave her. 2 versions of the same object, one broken by violence, one made whole by choice. She still shows up, immediately and without calculation, whenever someone needs help, human or animal alike. That instinct never changed. What changed was learning that showing up for someone doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. If this story stayed with you, I want to know what you think. Was Olivia's instinct to save a stranger brave, or reckless given everything it cost her afterward? Tell me your honest answer in the comments and why you believe it. The stories about ordinary courage and love built on respect resonate with you. Subscribe. The next one is coming soon.